extra, 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 read all about it. Extra, read all about it. Hey, you, extra, extra,
all about
read
what?
all of the news.
What news?
Degrassi news. Latest gerbils. One died. I think my cat scared it to death. It's all in here.
Hello, Degrassi fans, and welcome to Season 2 of the Degrassi Kid podcast, where each week we break down the history and impact of our favorite Canadian TV show. I'm Jocelyn, and today, on this special full-length episode, we're going to go back to where it all began, the original Kids of Degrassi Street, a humble little series that began in 1979 and produced only 26 episodes over the course of 7 years. The Kids of Degrassi Street introduced us to young, first-time actors who became staples in the show. Fan favorites like Wheels, Caitlin, and Lucy. But before they graduated into Degrassi Junior High, they all started at Degrassi Elementary School, playing other lovable characters named Griff, Lisa, and Karen. So, what made them change their names? Why did it take 7 years to make 20-some episodes? And what were the standout moments from the Kids of Degrassi Street that carried on for the rest of the franchise? This season, we're going to answer all the questions you could possibly have about the history of Degrassi, and we're going to do it series by series. How did Degrassi Junior High get made? Why did they reboot The Next Generation? How many times did Degrassi get canceled? It's probably more than you think. Each week, we're going to go through the timeline of Degrassi and dive into how each series made its impact. And it's only going to happen here on a brand new season of the Degrassi Kid podcast. The story of Degrassi surprisingly begins in 1956 with a young girl. Her family had just immigrated to Canada, and at only 8 years old, she had to start her life all over again. And though she looked just like all the other white kids in her new classroom, there were still things that made her stand out, things that made her an easy target for bullying. She was the new girl with a funny British accent who wore different clothing than everyone else around her. Quickly, the other third graders started mocking her with names like Slimy, Limey Linda, or yelling out, "Brit girl, shit girl, go back to where you came from." What they didn't know is 64 years later, that same young girl would recount those funny names at a lecture series called People Make History. Slimy Limey Linda grew up to be Linda Schuyler, the creator of the Degrassi franchise. At the lecture series, one of the students asked, "Does Degrassi have a simple theme that runs through every episode?" With a 40-year history on television, over 500 episodes that aired around the world, there is no way they could all share one single thing in common, right? Well, after reflecting on her own childhood and the countless Degrassi characters who lived through her same story, Linda replied, "I consider Degrassi to be probably the world's longest-running anti-bullying campaign." Wow, this story comes from the introduction of Linda Schuyler's new book, The Mother of All Degrassi, which will be linked in the description. All proceeds go to supporting the Kids Help Phone. And I have to say, I am really excited for it. It's not often that new pieces of Degrassi's history come to life. And from the Linda Schuyler, I'm fangirling to the max about this book. But one story that I am certain Linda will tell in her new memoir is how she went from being a junior high school teacher to, well, the mother of all Degrassi. In the 1970s, Linda Schuyler was a junior high school teacher at Earl Grey Senior Public School. And if you listen to my podcast about Bruce Mackey, the grandfather of all Degrassi, then in that episode when I was like, oh, there's just so much more to the story and I wish I could tell it to you, well, this is the rest of that story. We mentioned how Linda had a passion for using film as an educational tool for her students. And she essentially pioneered the use of multimedia in her lesson plans, which is funny because my first experience with Degrassi was through a multimedia lesson plan in my junior high health class. They wheeled in that bulky TV stand, and I spent the next 20 minutes of my prepubescent life learning that my body was changing and it was totally normal. Gross. But back in the 70s, as a fresh-faced young teacher, Linda Schuyler noticed something different when she walked into her classroom for the very first time. she was immediately introduced to a group of racially diverse students. Students who came to school speaking English and learning about Canadian culture, then went home and spoke a different language with their families. When Linda was that young, she just had an accent, but she still looked like everyone else around her. Now, Linda couldn't imagine what her young students were going through. Feeling inspired, Linda made a documentary called Between Two Worlds. She took filmmaking classes after school and learned how to tell stories through film the best that she could. And she didn't slow down. Soon after this documentary, Linda started working on another project, but she began to feel overwhelmed. She was still learning and described her footage as a muddled mess, so she decided it was time to find a film editor. And that's when she approached Kit Hood, who would later become a co-creator for Degrassi. And funny enough, Kit moved to Canada from Britain, where he was a child actor. How fitting! As an adult, Kit spent a lot of his time focusing on commercial work, doing advertisements, picking up editing gigs, just like Linda's muddled together documentary. Now, he couldn't salvage her footage this time, but Linda and Kit felt they worked well together. She could tell the stories, and he could make them come to life through editing. A true meeting of form and content. So together, in 1976, they started a production company called Playing with Time. This title was a reference to their first documentary together, about a marathon piano player who would attempt to break his own world record by playing piano for 117 hours straight. Can you imagine? I don't even know if I could watch Degrassi for 117 hours straight. Like, that is such a long time. This feature-length documentary called Jimmy Playing with Time was originally only supposed to be a 3-minute segment for CBC. But Linda and Kit got so invested in Jimmy's remarkable story that they got funding, became his agents, and set up his piano-playing marathon at the Canadian National Exhibition. And this is why I say Linda is my inspiration, because she doesn't just do things to get them done. She was like, a 3-minute story? Are you kidding me? I'm making a goddamn movie. And that was just the beginning. When one project ended, they just started another. For example, Our Cultural Fabric was a half-hour program that explored how clothing influences the way we perceive other cultures, which is very on brand for Linda at the time. Now, I've never seen Our Cultural Fabric or Between Two Worlds because media preservation just wasn't the same. But if I had a dream, oh dear Linda Schuyler, if I had a dream to even see one frame of these films, that would be crazy. But anyway, back to the story. Something crazy happens around this time. Bruce Mackey was a librarian who worked with Linda while she was teaching. And during this time, Linda was still doing teaching gigs and Kit was still doing commercial work because this was still all just a dream for them. Going on to create a successful, world-recognized franchise was still years and years away for these aspiring young filmmakers. So back at school, Bruce Mackey ordered books on filmmaking, and one of those books was called Ida Makes a Movie. Now, I said before that Bruce was embarrassed when this book came in because it was an animated children's book. It wouldn't help them make a movie at all. Ida was a cat who enters a filmmaking competition. She makes a movie with her friend around the neighborhood and clashes with the garbage men on her street. But how is that going to help Linda make a movie? Well, after reading the story, Bruce and Linda realized they actually loved it. It had a positive message about community and the power of storytelling through film. And of course, Kit was on board to make it. So Linda took the first step. She had to get the rights to turn this book into a movie. That's when she sought out an entertainment lawyer. And who did that entertainment lawyer end up being? Her future husband and business partner, Stephen Stone. And some of the story is actually from his own memoir called Whatever It Takes, because, spoiler alert, Stephen and Linda start their own production company where they reboot Degrassi The Next Generation. But that's for another episode. There's just always so much more to tell. Stephen gave her the best legal advice he could think of. Do not hire me. Stephen said getting a lawyer involved is just going to drive up the price and string out the process. Just take this paperwork and go directly to the publisher yourself. So she did. Linda traveled to New York with a small lump of cash and striked her own business deal for the audiovisual rights over Ida Makes a Movie. And then, after taking his advice and not hiring him, Stephen and Linda had no reason to stay in touch, so they would go 7 more years before they ever talked again. Now, in Stephen's book, he recounts how the timing was perfect for Linda and Kit because the Canadian Film Development Corporation was slowly transforming into what we now know as Telefilm Canada. And with this transformation, they were given a new mandate: to focus on building a television production industry in Canada. Telefilm now had $35 million to invest in new Canadian filmmaking projects. Now, obviously, Linda and Kit didn't walk away with $35 million, but with this government support gearing up and the thoughtful donations coming in from friends and family, Linda and Kit scrounged up just enough money to get started on creating the first episode of Degrassi. And speaking of the first episode, you're listening to the first episode of Season 2 on the Degrassi Kid podcast. This season, I'm breaking down the history of how our favorite show got made. And I want to send a special shout out to Owen, Annie M, and Sierra for joining Patreon during the season's break. Because of subscribers like you, I get to feel really supported and have my biggest dreams come true. So thank you very much, Owen, Annie M, and Sierra. Now let's get back to the story. The year was 1979. Linda Schuyler and Kit Hood didn't know it yet, but they were about to change the history of Canadian television as we know it. They had the rights to Ida Makes a Movie, but there was still lots of work to do. How do you turn a children's book into a movie? Where are they going to film it? Who's going to play Ida? And is she still going to be a cat? Linda and Kit decided to transform the anamorphic Ida into a real little girl with her older brother Fred and her best friend Cookie. The task of writing the script would be assigned to Playing with Time's office assistant, Amy Jo Cooper. And as a filming location, Bruce Mackey would offer up his home, and he just so happened to live at 98 Degrassi Street. Now, I want to say, we already know I love Bruce Mackey, but if I could go back in time, I think I'd want to be Amy Jo Cooper. Can you imagine being the first person to write a Degrassi script? Are you kidding? You would be the coolest person in the world. Like, to me, anyway. However, that script wasn't anything like we'd see today. In fact, the word Degrassi never even comes up. At this point, Ida Makes a Movie was just a standalone short film. They never intended to make it a series at all. And if you take the time to watch the very first episode, you'll notice it's extremely different than anything we would see today. There's no opening theme song, the cast is very small, and it takes a lot of inspiration from silent films with underlying score music and title cards. And of course, it was made by people who weren't at all experienced in filmmaking. For example, the first time we meet Fred, which is Ida's older brother, his back is to the audience for a full minute and a half. They never move the camera to a different angle, so we don't see his face until several scenes from now. He's also spending most of that minute and a half blocking our main character, Ida, as she's speaking. And I think these moments really showcase the charm of the original episode, and I wouldn't change a single thing about it. There's even a scene later when Ida's just gotten a letter. She finds out her short film has won first place at the competition. Zoe Newman, the young first-time actress who plays Ida, holds the letter right in front of her face the entire time. And when she's done, she pulls down the paper and looks right into the camera. Dead center. And I love it. I think it absolutely is a film for children to see themselves in and really defines where Degrassi was in this time period. And I think it's perfect. And with this, Linda and Kit cemented some core values in their storytelling that would stay true for the rest of Degrassi's history. From day one, the characters on Degrassi Street were cast age appropriately, meaning 7-year-old Ida Lucas was played by 7-year-old Zoe Newman in real life. And as we know, this happens for the rest of time. No matter what season it is, if you play a character on Degrassi, you have to be roughly their same age. But why? Why is this so important to the Degrassi brand? Well, casting age appropriate is going to have a unique impact on your audience. Now you can finally see yourself on TV. The characters are going to be so much more relatable. The stories are going to leave a lasting impression. The lessons you learn will actually stick. And as Linda Schuyler put it, a 15-year-old actor only has 15 years of life experience to bring to their character. They may not have done a lot of acting, but they know more than anyone what it's like to be 15 and have your heart broken, get into a fight with your best friend, or have to see your bully every single day at school. But it's not just age-appropriate casting that stays with the show's legacy. Right away, Degrassi does something radical for these young kids and their problems. Degrassi actually takes them seriously. So often, kids are brushed off with, wow, they have no idea how the real world is, or we trivialize their first grade problems. TV shows typically have laugh tracks and condescending adult reactions to their younger characters. But for Ida, This is her real world. The litter on Degrassi Street makes it hard to play outside with her friends, and this children's filmmaking competition is the most responsibility she's ever had. Degrassi makes sure to capture the authenticity of Ida's emotions and make them a big deal because they are. Linda said they're real children, making the personal and ethical choices kids make as they grow up. To emphasize this, they play around with the camera. At times they keep it low to make it feel like it's happening from a child's perspective. And when Ida talks to adults, they actually listen and talk back with respect. They try to resolve her issues instead of telling her to just get over it. And Degrassi does all of this by implementing another staple to the brand: casting unknown actors. Most of the actors on the Kids of Degrassi Street were just real kids pulled out of Bruce Mackey's classroom. Flyers were hung around the East End of Toronto, and they essentially advertised a unique after-school program. Background characters were just whoever was free, and sometimes even parents of the actors would step in to do a scene. However, just like the Degrassi we love today, they still did have their fair share of celebrities stop by whenever they could. You probably wouldn't recognize him now, but the host of Ida's filmmaking competition was actually a real CBC host named Elroy Yost. At the time, he had an extensive history of working on Canadian television. Right out of the gate, Degrassi has their classic mix: unknown, age-appropriate Canadian actors and standout celebrity cameos. Now, you might be wondering, okay, so Ida makes a movie about garbage, she wins a competition, and that's it? Where's the drama? What's the story? What's the tea? Well, here's the idea. Ida's out playing with her best friend Cookie, but there's garbage everywhere, and it's getting in their way. While Ida's busy being upset, Cookie notices a flyer for a children's filmmaking competition. And Ida decides, hey, I'm going to enter it, and I'm going to make a movie about litter. That'll teach everyone. But it's not that simple. Ida faces a lot of obstacles. Her camera breaks, she needs money to fix it, and she fights with her brother Fred, who tells her to give it up because it's a lost cause.
Well, what good is it going to do, Ida? You don't even know how to use a camera. I do, too. Okay, tell me how then. I can learn, can't I?
After finally overcoming her problems, Ida starts to film her movie. She says, the idea is you pick up your garbage, plant some flowers, and make your neighborhood a nice place to live. However, when she films her movie, Fred refuses to take off a soldier's helmet that he was playing with earlier. So when the judges see the movie, they think it's about the devastating effect war has on children. A very mature message, but not the one Ida was trying to make. So the point of the story is this. Ida battles with the decision. Does she tell the truth and risk losing her award, or does she let them think what they want because it's not her fault they interpreted it wrong, right? In the end, Ida talks to her mom and decides to do the right thing and tell the truth. And here's the final scene where Elroy Yost decides a brave and honest Ida deserves her award after all.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give this award to a very fine young lady who's not only a terrific filmmaker, but has the courage to stand on her own 2 feet and tell the truth. This award is yours, Ida T. Lucas.
Let's give a big hand for Ida T. Lucas and her absolutely splendid film on how to wage war on garbage.
And that's it. There's no B-plot, there's no school involved, and the film only has 3 young actors, Ida, Cookie, and Fred. Other than that, we only meet 3 more adults who play supporting characters. Ida's mom, the store clerk who fixes her camera, and L.Y., the filmmaking competition host. A huge difference from teenagers in a high school surrounded by a huge ensemble cast and background characters. But this one little short film about Ida and her friends is truly monumental as the launching point for the history of Degrassi. We're going to learn how so many little decisions build up to a huge franchise recognized around the world. But first, I want to thank all of you who built me up. Adrian, Annie, Ashley, Brittany, Chrissy, Evie, Kimberly, Lucy, Max, Najama, Rachel, Randy, Rebecca, Sarah J, Steven, Stevie, Teal, and Wilson all support me on Patreon as the ultimate Degrassi fans. Can you believe it? Because of you, I get to feel like Ida T. Lucas and get my passion out there for the world to see. So thank you to each and every one of you. Now, let's dive back into Degrassi. It's 1 full year later that Degrassi makes their second short film called Cookie Goes to Hospital. This time we focus on Cookie, who gets sick and has to go to the hospital for a surgery. And I love this episode because there's a huge focus on making Cookie feel safe and informed. The nurses use a children's doll to show Cookie what happens during her surgery, what her body will look like when she wakes up. As well, the nurse actually has Cookie give her doll a needle so she can see firsthand what that experience will be like. And the nurse does it all while acknowledging the fact that it's okay to be scared by this new and big experience. I can only imagine how helpful this episode would be if you were that young and needed a big and scary surgery. But still, just because we are focusing on those kids on Degrassi Street doesn't mean it's become a franchise quite yet. CBC ordered this as a new short film from Linda and Kit, but we're still years away from a real series. However, because so much time has passed, the team behind the scenes keeps growing and growing. Ida Makes a Movie only gave credit to Linda, Kit, Amy Jo, and the writer of the book. This time, there's actually end credits scrolling by with an entirely new crew of people. Cookie's nurse was played by Susan Accord, who became a writer for the series. Philip Earnshaw receives his first cinematography credit, and he goes on to work on every iteration of Degrassi for the next 40 years, like right up until the end of next class. Louis Mandy and Wendy Watson received their first music credit. They go on to do the original theme songs and Everybody Wants Something by the Zit Remedy. But for me, the biggest change that we see is the sense of world building around Degrassi. We see the Degrassi Street sign, the Degrassi grocery store, and the kids even make a Degrassi Street club. And none of it is a movie set or a studio. It's all truly capturing the real world around Degrassi Street in the East End of Toronto. All thanks to Bruce Mackey and his connection to the community. From there, Degrassi keeps pace with one short film each year. The next story is Irene Moves In. The film explores themes of racism at such a young age and teaches you the value of not judging others just because they look different than you. Irene has just moved in to 95 Degrassi Street and she's our first Asian character. After only one look, Ida decides right away that she doesn't like her and she doesn't want her in their club. So she starts picking on Irene and saying they can't be friends. It's a big topic to handle at a young age, but my favorite part of this episode is Cookie. She's younger than Ida and always does whatever Ida tells her to. But this time, Cookie stands up and tells Ida she's being a bad person. Let's listen in on how this tough conversation plays out between two young girls.
That wasn't nice, Ida. But she deserved it. She thinks she's so smart. She thinks she can just move in here and take over. You could at least be nice to her. Why should I? Because she's a human being just like you and me. I don't care what she is. I don't like her. And if you were my friend, you wouldn't like her either. Then I guess I'm not your friend.
Way to go, Cookie. Now, what's interesting is that in both Ida Makes a Movie and Cookie Goes to Hospital, the adults step in to help the kids through their problems. Ida's mom encouraged her to tell the truth. Cookie's nurse helped her not be so scared of needles in hospitals. But now we see the conflict and resolutions start to take place between the kids. Ida doesn't learn the lesson of accepting everyone for who they are because an adult tells her to. She learns this lesson after her 6-year-old best friend confronts her on a playground. As a kid, this is how you learn life lessons. You make mistakes and learn from them yourself. You don't always run to your parents and say, well, what do I do now? And it amazes me that with each episode of the Kids of Degrassi Street, you see these first-time small decisions that make a huge impact on the rest of the show. For example, in both Degrassi High and Degrassi Next Class, Erica and Lola have abortions, but they never go to their parents about it. They go to a peer that they can trust and rely on. And if Degrassi wasn't making these big decisions way back in the Kids of Degrassi Street, who knows what these mature storylines would look like so many years later. But with that, Noel Buys a Suit is the last original short film from this era. At this point, we're only 4 episodes in, but several years have gone by. Ida isn't a little 7-year-old anymore. She's a preteen with a large group of friends. And in my opinion, there's 2 changes in this one film that will go on to have a lasting impact on the Degrassi franchise. First, we meet Noel's little sister Lisa. She's played by Stacey Mistyshin, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because she also goes on to play Caitlin Ryan until season 7 of The Next Generation. Isn't that crazy? Her introduction to the show is not only a catalyst for future characters, she also kicks off the next generation of characters right now. Soon, Noel and Ida will be getting older, and these younger siblings will step in and start to take over the series. But for now, we're focused on Noel buys a suit, and this episode also introduces us to the adult rule. And if you don't know what that is, it's as simple as this. No two adults can be seen having a private conversation together unless a kid is around to overhear it. In this episode, Noel's dad is getting remarried, and Noel doesn't like his new stepmom. Watching it as an adult, you can see she's just trying to figure out where she fits into her new family dynamic. But to a kid, she comes off as controlling and like she's butting in where she doesn't belong. Noel overhears them talking about their upcoming wedding day, and it makes him upset. It may seem really small, but in this one distinct moment, Degrassi is defining a core value. The show is entirely from a kid's perspective. And those aren't the only changes that happen. Because so much time is passing between each individual episode, Linda and Kit's production company keeps getting bigger and bigger. In this episode, we get a cameo from John Bertram, or JB. He goes on to become a writer for Degrassi, and he does the voice of Principal Lawrence on Degrassi Junior High. Fun fact, we know I love those. And Yan Moore gets his first editing credit, though we recognize him mostly as the head writer on Degrassi. And that's because in just a few months, Degrassi will start writing an episode called Casey Draws the Line, and they start to run into some problems with the storytelling. And even though Yan was an editor, he had an idea and started to write new scenes for the episode. Linda and Kit loved them so much they hired Yan as a writer, and he stayed on the show until season 4 of The Next Generation as a consultant. And to this day, he gets a creator's credit on every episode of Degrassi, which is very well deserved, I might add. It's only one small episode lost in the huge history of Degrassi, but again, in these small moments, we see so many big decisions that impact the future of their storytelling. For now, Degrassi's made 4 short films. Degrassi Street is stretching longer and longer with even more kids. And now in 1982, CBC has given Linda and Kit a bigger budget and the go-ahead to produce 4 more short films back to back, all about what the kids get up to on Degrassi Street. CBC finally started to see the potential of these short films and wanted to start marketing them as a package deal. So they asked Linda Schuyler and Kit Hood to come up with a name that would tie all the episodes together. Linda said, well, each story does have a different main character, but they're all about the same group of kids, and we did film them around my friend's house on Degrassi Street, so why don't we just call it the Kids of Degrassi Street? Like, isn't that crazy? Now, if you named a movie or TV show, it would be like, is this marketable? What are the merchandising options? Can this be a hashtag? But Linda was like, well, it's about a bunch of kids. They're on Degrassi Street, so we'll call it that. And now it's the most recognizable street name across the world. And it's not even a big street, guys. Like, it's a small residential one-way street in Toronto. It's not Queen Street or Main Street. There's no staple landmarks on it, like a university or anything. Like, it's literally just a street. And now there's people like me who go out of their way to fly to Toronto and visit this street in real life. I mean, I even have the Degrassi Street sign tattooed on my body. 40 years later, I have the Degrassi Kid podcast, right? Like, it's crazy. But back in 1982, the Kids of Degrassi Street was their brand new title to work with. Louis Manny and Wendy Watson were tasked with making an opening theme song that would retroactively be put on all the older films. And 4 new stories were created. Lisa Makes the Headlines, Sophie Minds the Store, Casey Draws the Line, and Pete Takes a Chance. The stories tackled similar themes of honesty and the realities of growing up. But now, because so much more time has gone by, we're focusing on stories about the younger siblings. And not only have the kids started to grow up, the editing, the acting, the writing, it all got better with time too. But it's still early. They were still inexperienced and experimenting, and Degrassi used these next 4 episodes to really find their groove. So while Degrassi starts collecting their bearings, let's focus on the biggest takeaways that are happening in Degrassi's structure. In Lisa Makes the Headlines, Lisa is a young journalist who creates a newspaper called the Degrassi Journal. She oversteps her boundaries, misrepresents the facts, and ends the episode realizing she should have minded her own business, and there's two sides to every story. The scenario may sound familiar because Lisa is the original archetype for some of our favorite leading characters, like Caitlin Ryan, who frequently oversteps her boundaries and runs to the student newspaper about it. At one point, Caitlin gets so worked up over Spike because the PTA wants to kick her out of school for being pregnant. Caitlin fights against this and writes an article about Spike's pregnancy, demanding justice. But when Spike reads it, she gets upset. Spike didn't want to become one of Caitlin's projects and tells Caitlin to move on and mind her business. That still sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? Who else constantly oversteps their boundaries and writes for the student newspaper? Who else thinks only their opinion is the right opinion and makes sure everybody knows it? That's right. Lisa and Caitlin are the inspiration for Emma Nelson and Claire Edwards. And all of that history starts here with Lisa Makes the Headlines. Let's listen in on a scene as the Degrassi kids sit in their clubhouse and read Lisa's misguided article about Ida.
Why didn't you tell us you were robbed, Ida?
Well, it wasn't such a big deal.
No big deal. All your books and stuff? If it was me, I'd call in the RCMP.
Is that what it says? All my books? Let me see.
The RCMP doesn't investigate crimes like this, stupid.
It'd be a miracle the day Lisa comes up with the facts.
This is probably one of my favorite scenes from the original Degrassi. The RCMP doesn't handle stuff like this, stupid. And I just think they're so funny. And they truly, truly capture how little kids really talk to each other. And I love it. And the next episode is called Sophie Minds the Store. And this episode takes place almost entirely inside the Degrassi Street grocery store, which is a true staple in the series. Later, there's an episode where these two young kids try to buy cigarettes, pretending it's like for their mom, because that was something you could do in the 80s. And the owner of the Degrassi grocery store is Sari Friedland, who in real life is the production manager for Degrassi. But for now, we're getting really exciting cameos from both Linda Schuyler and Bruce Mackey, who play Sophie's customers. And it's so funny because Linda's IMDb page is like decades of producing and creating these world-renowned series, and her acting credits are like customer with hat. And it should be noted, not only was Linda a co-creator of Degrassi, she was also like Degrassi's sandwich maker, Degrassi's carpool driver. If a job had to be done, Linda would just do it, which is so crazy. If you visited the most recent set of like Degrassi The Next Generation or Degrassi Next Class, it's this huge place and there's an entire department for every little task that has to be done. So those sandwiches were now being made by an entire crafts department. And like when I was an extra on Degrassi, I got a free lunch from them. And oh my God, there was so much good food. If I had have realized I was getting a free lunch that day, I wouldn't have eaten the popcorn that they gave me. But anyway, I am getting very off track. There is a lot of really cool and small details that like I would love to break down in every single one of these new episodes. Because for me, every single frame of Degrassi, I'm like, here is 25,000 fun facts. But for now, we'll just try to breeze through them. Overall, the biggest takeaway from this block of episodes is establishing the younger siblings as main characters and growing the world of Degrassi Street. We now start to see Degrassi Elementary School, and we learn one of the teachers is Mr. Mackey, played by our favorite Bruce. Now, off camera, Linda started to pick up some tricks to make her young, first-time actors feel more comfortable on screen. Linda said, the scripts are adopted to suit the kids' speech rhythms during rehearsal. We read through the script, then discuss the intentions of the episode. We know we've done something wrong when we reach the end of a script and a couple of kids still look puzzled. And thus begins the cycle of writing scripts and then vetting them through their biggest resource, real kids and real teenagers. We know that Degrassi will continue to do this for the rest of time. Now, it should be said, Degrassi only makes one short film in 1983, and it's called Chuck Makes a Choice. And I just want to touch on it quickly. Chuck is one of the older kids, and he's big brother to Pete. Pete later goes on to play Alex in Degrassi Junior High and Degrassi High. But for now, Chuck and Pete are two young brothers that faced really mature topics at a very young age. We learn that their dad is in prison. Chuck and Pete talk about it with their mom, about why he's there. Their friends ask questions, and Chuck even goes to visit his dad at a halfway house. It doesn't take long for Degrassi to address the reality that these kids have really diverse backgrounds and very different home lives, but they still accept each other. To show us the contrast, we meet Trina. She gets assigned to work on a project with Chuck, and they have a bit of a crush on each other too. Because Chuck wants to impress Trina, he keeps it a secret that his dad is in prison. Now, to show this contrast, we visit Trina's home, and it's very large and clean and quiet, while Chuck's home is small and cluttered and has a blaring TV in the background. We also see Trina's embarrassed by her dad, which is the same emotion Chuck is feeling, but for different reasons. As a response to these episodes, a journalist in the Globe and Mail wrote, "Degrassi shows us that you are unique, but your troubles are not. So don't be ashamed on either count." And I love that quote so much. And I love Degrassi so much. And one thing I have to mention is Trina's dad is played by Kit Hood. He's not credited in this episode, but if you know who you're looking for, you will recognize him. And if anything, his random British accent gives him away. He even calls Trina a ragamuffin. As well, Wendy Watson makes her first appearance as the music teacher, Mrs. Gonzalez. And her real-life husband, Louis, has been running around the entire time as a background character. Like, remember when Ida broke her camera? Louis fixed it. When Lisa's a journalist, Louis is in the back delivering newspapers. Noel buys a suit. Louis is the best man at the wedding. Like, he's everywhere. But ultimately, at the end of 1983, the show has started to figure out its structure. They've built a world on Degrassi Street, and the size of the cast is growing into something way more familiar to us today. But next, Degrassi gets the go-ahead to really cement the Kids of Degrassi Street as an official series. CBC and Telefilm Canada order 11 brand new episodes. And speaking of 11 brand new episodes, that's what you're going to hear on this brand new season of the Degrassi Kid podcast. And that's all because of Patreon subscribers. So I want to take a quick moment to shout out Dave, Degrassi CSI, Kat, Liza, Molly, Nikki, and Shay, who are subscribed at the Spirit Squad tier. Your support means the world to me. So thank you so much. Now, Degrassi fans, let's get back and set the scene. Picture this. It's November 1984, and you've just started to settle in for the school year. You've made the best friends of your life, and you can't wait to get home for the weekend and watch TV in your family's living room. Earlier this week, the TV guide came in the mail, and you read through every page until you found something amazing. CBC will be airing brand new episodes of the Kids of Degrassi Street every single week. The series opens with Billy Breaks the Chain. You don't know this, but Sari Friedland is one of the background actors. She's Degrassi's production manager. A few episodes later, you meet Degrassi's head writer, Yan Moore. But for now, he's playing a real estate agent when one of the kids on Degrassi Street suddenly has to move to Vancouver. You don't realize it, but you're watching the history of Degrassi come to life on your bulky small screen television set. And I'm not even born yet, but I'm already jealous of you because that sounds really cool. Now, like I said, it would be a lot to break down the next 11 episodes to their core, and I want to, trust me. But if you want even more Degrassi knowledge, just read Linda Schuyler's new book, linked in the description. And this is not sponsored, by the way. I am obviously buying this book, especially like the proceeds go directly to the Kids Help Phone. That is so on brand. I love it. But like, how cool would it be to get a signed copy of Linda Schuyler's book from Linda Schuyler? I'm just saying, I'm just throwing it out there. But for now, Degrassi fans, here's your key takeaway from the winter of 1984. We start to meet a lot more kids who will carry over into Degrassi Junior High. And Degrassi spends this time diving into really impactful stories about bullying, the importance of being yourself, and what real-world issues can look like when made accessible to children. For example, the kids host a mock trial with prosecutors and defendants. They even host an election with political campaigns and voter registration. And it's all happening in between periods of the 5th grade. As well, Degrassi's episodes have certain intentions. For example, Liz Sits the Scheggles is pretty much a how-to guide for babysitting, and Ryan Runs for Help is about the dangers of playing on construction sites. Later, Degrassi even does a spin-off with the same actors, but again, with new different names, and it's called Danger Keep Out. It was co-produced with the Construction Safety Association of Ontario and has almost the exact same plot as this Kids of Degrassi Street episode. One of the kids is pressured to play on a construction site, they fall into a deep, deep hole, and they hurt themselves. And everyone learns a valuable lesson about playing safely. But that all comes after the Kids of Degrassi Street. For now, there's 3 things I really want to dive into. the newest celebrity guest appearance that you would recognize today, an episode that you could no longer air on television, and we'll look at what was so special about these block of episodes that gears us up for the finale of the Kids of Degrassi Street. Let's start with cameos. First off, you remember Cookie from the original short films? Well, we haven't seen her for a while, but she makes a special comeback for the episode titled Catherine Finds Her Balance, a clever name about a young girl enrolled in a gymnastics competition who's finding her balance between her divorced mom and dad. But what's really amazing is her mom is played by Alana Miles. Alana Miles is a real-life rock star from the 80s. You would still recognize her. Her most popular song is Black Velvet and That Little Boy's Smile. It's Black Velvet. It's called Black Velvet. But because I love a good fun fact, I have to ask you, who do you think was Alana Miles's entertainment lawyer? Figure this, it was Stephen Stone. Everything is so connected to each other that even I'm like, am I telling the truth? But I am. He even writes about it in his book. It's amazing. As well, there's some key people working on this new Degrassi that will stay with the franchise for many, 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 many years. At the time, Philip Earnshaw was just a recent film school graduate who was hired to be the cinematographer for Linda and Kit's production company. And like I said, he stays with Degrassi up until the very end. Like, can you imagine graduating film school and your first job is at Degrassi, where you will eventually go on to retire? Like, that is the dream. Michael Bachut also has a crazy story. He plays just a random welder with like no lines, you can't really see his face, and he works behind the scenes on a couple episodes here and there of Degrassi High. But then 20 years go by, and Degrassi The Next Generation is well into their like 8th season. But all of a sudden, Michael comes back as a producer and production manager. 20 years later. Like, of course, he works on other film projects during that time, but I was like, how do you get reconnected to a show after 20 years? Well, I did my research because I'm Degrassi kid and I just had to know. Here's the fascinating, exclusive, behind-the-scenes stories of Michael Bachut, from random background actor to producer. This is how Michael stayed connected to the Degrassi series for over 20 years. He's Linda Schuyler's brother. I thought that story was going to be crazy, and then it was like, that makes sense as to why he would stay connected. But what's really fun is in these episodes, Linda makes a few more cameos, reviving her breakout role. Linda, again, plays customer in Degrassi grocery store and customer in record shop, and maybe someday she'll play guest on the Degrassi Kid podcast. But something so interesting is established on screen. Griff is played by Neil Hope. He goes on to play Wheels in Degrassi Junior High. And just like how Lisa and Caitlin are the same, Griff and Wheels are also basically the exact same character. Right down to the fact that both of their parents were killed in car accidents. And Griff's older brother steps in to take care of him. But get this, you know how Wheels goes to visit his biological father? Well, that biological father also plays his older brother in the Kids of Degrassi Street. I'm telling you, if you love Degrassi Junior High, you should watch the Kids of Degrassi Street. There is so much inspiration drawn from the original series that you will watch every single episode and go, oh, that's cool. As well, remember I said the students do a mock trial? Well, the kids decide to do this trial after reading The Merchant of Venice in their English class. And it becomes very common that what the kids are learning in school reflects what happens in the episode. In Degrassi The Next Generation, there's an episode where Jimmy is trying to tame Ashley down from her goth look and get her to be normal again. And at the time, they're reading The Taming of the Shrew. In Degrassi High's abortion episode, Erica is dealing with two opposing mindsets while reading The Lord of the Flies. So here in this forgotten little episode, Degrassi's making some minor decisions that will carry on through every generation. And it's so freaking cool. Like, you need to watch it. I'm telling you. And like I said, this block of episodes officially passes the torch to the younger generation. The older kids, Irene, Chuck, Noel, and Ida, will no longer appear in the series. In theory, when we start Degrassi Junior High, they would be in the 8th grade. But for whatever reason, they don't come back. And I do want to say, remember earlier I said one of the Degrassi kids moves to Vancouver? Well, Ida is in this episode, but she doesn't have any lines. Instead, if you're paying attention, you'll notice she's in the background filming a home movie for their last day on Degrassi Street. And this is just like such a really cool throwback to the original episode, especially for fans like me who love to analyze everything. Now, this has all been like a really nice and kind deep dive into the history of Degrassi. But it's time we get into something that I wasn't really sure how to talk about. The episode of the Kids of Degrassi Street that I could hardly sit through. Degrassi is about to take on their final season, and it's gonna be a hit. The finale, called Griff Gets a Hand, explores all the big emotions that come with grief and loss when the school's crossing guard, Danny, suddenly passes away. This episode goes on to win award after award for handling such a tough and seemingly adult topic through the eyes of young children. Before this, another episode stirs up the same reaction. Degrassi tackles a mature and difficult moment in a young person's life and handles it with respect. But in a 2020 lens, it's almost impossible to watch and even harder to understand it's a real episode of Degrassi. But I think it's only fair if I spent all of this time telling you to watch the series. We also talk about the uncomfortable moments in its history. Hi, this is Jocelyn from the future, butting in to tell you I recorded a very detailed analysis about this one specific episode of Degrassi. I played clips from it, I connected it to a modern episode, and I even referred to other shows from the 1980s that tackled the same issue. Then I was like, Jocelyn, this one segment is almost longer than the entire episode of Degrassi itself. So if you were looking forward to hearing that detailed story, you can head on over to Patreon. But in short, The Kids of Degrassi Street has an episode that is difficult to watch in 2022. But it was created with the intent to be educational and inclusive, just like always. So I'll spare you the rant, and instead, let's just finally dive into the finale of The Kids of Degrassi Street. The final 6 episodes of The Kids of Degrassi Street are going to define the series as we know it. If you've seen any publicity about the show, it's probably been from this era. So far, only 20 episodes have been released, but the first short film, Ida Makes a Movie, aired over 6 years ago. To put it into perspective, that is the same amount of time that happens between Degrassi Goes Hollywood at the end of season 8 to the series finale at the end of season 14. And how many episodes does Degrassi make during that time? Over 200, and 2 full-length feature movies. Like, The Kids of Degrassi Street made 20. It's so hard for me to wrap my head around it. Like, when I first saw that The Kids of Degrassi Street was created in 1979, but Degrassi Junior High was created 8 years later in 1987 with the same cast, I was like, what? How is that possible? But, like, now we know. The stories started when they were really, really young, and by the end of it, we're learning about their even younger siblings. So it makes total sense now. But what this really means is Degrassi had a lot of time to figure things out. This moment is truly the turning point for the Kids of Degrassi Street. Right now, they're going through the transformation of a few people experimenting with storytelling and film to now having a fully realized concept with experienced filmmakers and storytellers. This moment in Degrassi's history will be the stepping stone into creating a new series called Degrassi Junior High. So what's the big deal? Why is this block of episodes so different? Up until now, you could watch any episode of Degrassi in any order and it wouldn't have made a difference. Think of shows like Lizzie McGuire or That's So Raven. You don't have to know what happened last week to understand the story. Each episode stands on its own because the conflict doesn't carry over. Everything is resolved in this neat little package by the end of the story. And things get reset so we can have a new story all over again. And this has been the case so far for the Kids of Degrassi Street. But this time, Degrassi sat down and planned out their next 6 episodes and created character arcs through every single one. And they were now all going to be linked together by a running plot line. The characters were going to grow and change between this episode and the finale. For example, during this block of episodes, Lisa and Griff go on a date, but there's a classic misunderstanding and they end up angry with each other. This fight spans several episodes. Sometimes it's just a nasty look that they share, but it's the first time that Degrassi's conflict today impacts what happens at school tomorrow. Now, that is such an ingrained part of Degrassi to have these connecting plot lines that it's kind of hard to imagine that there was a time where they didn't do that. Imagine if one week Marco has this big, over-the-top, coming out moment, and then in the next episode he's not even gay. We could not imagine a Degrassi that's like that, but it exists, and it's right here, and it's right now. Even more, the final 6 episodes of Degrassi are advertised as Degrassi Yearbook. Each week, the students get together to work on a new task, fundraising, taking photos, selling ad space, until the last episode where they all graduate and complete the yearbook just in the nick of time. This one project connects each episode together and leads to bigger problems. For example, the kids host a Degrassi Elementary School talent show to raise money for the yearbook, but Martin struggles with his magic act after learning he needs a hearing aid, and Rachel struggles with her body image when she can't fit into an old dress for her performance. These yearbook moments not only connect the stories together, but they're a catalyst for conflict every single week. This means Degrassi's done a complete overhaul to their story structure. In this talent show, for example, Martin has his own storyline, Rachel has her own storyline, and the yearbook is just running through it. That's very similar to what we'd see today. Every episode of Degrassi has a main story, then a second story, and then something else going on at the same time. Before this, Degrassi was telling one story per episode. Ida Makes a Movie is just about Ida making a movie. Nothing else is going on. It's this moment in time that Degrassi adopts their ABC story structure, which they'll use from now until the end of Degrassi Next Class. And 100% it'll be used in the reboot. And in fact, all of your favorite TV shows use it. But what is ABC story structure? Well, to save you from another long-winded analysis, I have a bonus video this time. I'm going to break down the history of how writing structure has changed on the Kids of Degrassi Street. They only started with 3 kids, and now there's an entire elementary school filled with students who each have a unique story to tell, and who each get in each other's way when they try to tell it. That bonus video will be made available for Ultimate Degrassi fans over on Patreon. So yes, you will get this podcast, a breakdown of Degrassi's first controversial episode, and a bonus video about ABC story structure. I'm telling you, when I took those 2 weeks off, I was in my Britney Spears moment. She was like, "You better work, bitch," and I did. You're welcome. That video also includes a detailed breakdown of Connie Makes a Catch, which is the first episode that kicks off Degrassi Yearbook. You'll actually be able to see some clips from the episode and get a feel for what the original Degrassi was actually like. But for now, things are changing. First of all, the ABC story structure is implemented, which basically means each episode has more than one story going on at a time. Second, the episodes are now connected to each other. What happens today will affect tomorrow, and resolutions shouldn't be expected at the end of each episode. And third, Degrassi has changed its branding to Degrassi Yearbook. Today we look back and see the Kids of Degrassi Street as one complete unit. But at the time, this block of episodes was a standout moment for the franchise. The final 6 episodes are called Connie Makes a Catch, Karen Keeps Her Word, Ryan Runs for Help, Martin Hears the Music, Lisa Gets the Picture, and Griff Gets a Hand. Griff Gets a Hand is the award-winning series finale that tackled the death of the mentally disabled crossing guard named Danny. And because this episode was so monumental at the time, I want to play you a clip of how Miss Gonzalez, or our favorite Wendy Watson, breaks the news of Danny's sudden death in her 6th grade classroom.
I'm afraid I have some very bad news for you today. You're going to hear about it sooner or later, but I don't like rumors. I'm afraid that Danny O'Brien, our crossing guard, died last night. He had a stroke.
What's a stroke?
Well, it's when the blood vessel in your brain gets clogged, and the blood can't get through, and the brain can't work without blood, so it stops.
It's so much more impactful if you actually get to watch it and see the reactions, because in this episode, Griff's made a promise to Danny, but he didn't keep it. And Griff deals with the feelings of guilt, feeling like he let Danny down and he'll never be able to fix it. At home, Griff doesn't have a space to talk about these feelings. His parents are dead, and his older brother may be his new guardian, but he's still his brother. He picks on him, calls him names, and he doesn't want to do things parents would normally do, like go to his elementary school graduation. Griff feels embarrassed. He feels sad. He feels angry. He has no space to open up and talk about his grief until it all blows up and he gets into a physical fight with his brother Duke. This is the aftermath of that intense moment.
Tell me about Danny.
We were friends. He wanted me to finish his picture, but I was always too busy. Now he's mad at me.
People who are dead aren't angry. It's the ones who are still alive who have to worry about stuff like that.
But I see him sometimes.
Well, you're seeing your imagination. After the crash, I thought I saw Mom and Dad, too. I miss them, you know.
Are you gonna die too, dude?
Me? Hey, no way. You're stuck with me for a while yet. Better get used to it, eh? I'd like to come to your graduation if you still want me to.
They work so well together that I absolutely understand why they made these actors a father and son duo on Degrassi Junior High. But it has to be said, at the time, children's programming wasn't anything like this. The final episode becomes the baseline for every future episode of Degrassi. Behind the scenes, the actors are comfortable, the writers have finally figured out their groove, and the show is gaining recognition all around the world. And that's when CBC decides to stop by and do a spotlight on the real Degrassi Street. To prepare for this podcast, I've been reading newspaper articles, press releases, and Stephen Stoneman's memoir, and that's because there's almost no behind-the-scenes footage for the kids at Degrassi Street. When I do my deep dive into Degrassi Next Class, most of my primary resources are going to be like videos from Snapchat takeovers and cast Google Hangouts. Like, nothing exists back in the early 80s. Except this one video that gives a glimpse into the life on set of the kids at Degrassi Street. CBC stops by to watch how an episode gets made. They talk with Linda about how Degrassi turned these unknown children into international superstars. It's so interesting to watch that I'm actually going to link it in the description. But for now, here's a quick audio clip from this original piece of history. Let's listen in as Linda Schuyler and the other actors talk about making Degrassi.
The Kids of Degrassi Street has gone into its 6th year of production of critically acclaimed dramas for children. Nan Devitt of CBC Toronto reports that this show has turned a group of ordinary Toronto children into internationally known television actors.
Degrassi Street. It's a humble little street with an unassuming grocery store on the corner. And it's also the setting for an award-winning children's television series.
The response to these shows is incredible. I mean, Degrassi Street is a little tiny street, as you well know, over in Toronto's East End. And it's known around the world.
Most of the actors in this series come from the Degrassi neighborhood. They wear their own clothes and no makeup. And they've all learned their craft on the job.
I learned, when I first started working with them, I didn't know what was going on. But then afterwards, I found out this is a camera and this is what I'm supposed to talk into and whatever.
The episodes being shot in the back alleys of Toronto now will be aired on the CBC starting in December. Nan Devitt for CBC News.
It makes sense that CBC decided to do their story now, because compared to the early experimental episodes, this new season of Degrassi Yearbook was a big deal. BBC even bought the rights to air these new episodes sight unseen. The success of the original films was so big in the UK that they just wanted more. Degrassi was described as the feeling of eavesdropping on the kids next door. Jim Bodden from the Toronto Star said, "The series doesn't pander to what we think kids should be watching," adding that Degrassi reminds us what was important at such a young age. John Ioannou, who played Pete, commented that a lot of other kids shows are cartoons with a lot of violence. At only 12 years old, he said, "They have guns, there's fightings, I guess they just don't know what else to do." Stacy commented on how she has a younger brother at home, and she doesn't like to see him getting those ideas in his head when it comes to violent cartoons. She thinks Degrassi would be a really good show for him to grow up and watch. Behind the scenes, you can see the value of having conversations with these young actors about the material they're working on. On most television or movie sets, the expectation is you show up, you do a scene, and that's it. There's not a space to dive into how you feel about the material. But these 12-year-old actors are giving these incredibly mature and thoughtful opinions on the dangers of violence in children's programming. You can see that these life lessons extend beyond the camera, and I think that is such a testament to this show being made by a teacher. And even though the kids were now being watched all around the globe, they still didn't feel like celebrities. Stacey Mistician said, "Everyone's really fun to work with. They don't treat us like stars, and we're not really. We're just kids. But we are learning, and someday I'd like to do this professionally." All of these things still ring true. Even when changing their target audience from children to teenagers, Degrassi was still just like eavesdropping on the kids next door. And Stacey's quote about acting on Degrassi in 1985 is almost the exact same as what Annie Clark said about acting on Degrassi in 2010.
They just treat us like we all just were a big group working together. There was no one above anyone, which I think was such a great first real working environment, because I feel like I've carried that now going forward on other sets.
That quote comes from our podcast we did together, and I just had to mention Annie at least once because she's my favorite person. But honestly, the Kids of Degrassi Street is often forgotten about and pushed aside. It has different characters. It's so old and boring. It's nothing like the new Degrassi. Why would I ever want to watch it? Well, simply put, it's the blueprint. Watching the Kids of Degrassi Street is like watching our favorite show grow up. The first episode is about a 6-year-old learning the value of being honest. The finale is about all the big and confusing feelings that come with grief and loss. The actors, the writing, the structure, it all grows up in just a few episodes. And when you get to the finale of Degrassi Yearbook, you're seeing everything that went into the first step of Degrassi Junior High. If I had to recommend 4 episodes that would help you understand the progression of the Kids of Degrassi Street, I would suggest watching Ida Makes a Movie, Lisa Makes the Headlines, Martin Meets the Pirates, and Griff Gets a Hand. In just over an hour, you can see the progression through 7 years of television. And if you can't watch it, well, let's break it down together and make sure we've answered our opening questions. Why did the characters change their names when they moved to Degrassi Junior High? Why did it take 7 years to make 20-some episodes? And what were the standout moments from the Kids of Degrassi Street that carried on for the rest of the franchise? Before we get to our final breakdown, I want to say a big thank you to my final Patreon subscribers. Alyssa, Brooke, my dad, Annie's mom, Renee, Tanisha, Jade, and Xandria. They all subscribed at the opening tier of the Dot Cafe and are a huge reason I was so supported through my first season, as well as Link, Ben, James, and DP, who are huge supporters of season 1. Every new sign up on Patreon gives me even more confidence that you guys like what I'm doing, and that feels huge. So thank you to all of you. But for now, let's get back to what we've been waiting for. The final breakdown. The Kids of Degrassi Street finale aired on January 5th, 1986. 7 years after Ida Makes a Movie premiered as a one-time short film on CBC. Linda Schuyler and Kit Hood would use these 26 episodes as the blueprint for their spin-off series, Degrassi Junior High. They cemented some core values and made some big decisions early on that would carry through the rest of the franchise. They created a core group of people to work on the project for years to come. Head writer Yan Moore, cinematographer Philip Earnshaw, production manager Sari Friedland, musical composers Louis Manny and Wendy Watson, consultants like Bruce Mackey, who all worked together to impact the Degrassi brand in their own way. Actors like Stacey Mistyshin, Neil Hope, Anais Granovsky, Arlene Lott, John Ioannou, Sarah Charlesworth, and Christopher Charlesworth, Tyson Talbot, and Danny G. Brown will all graduate onto Degrassi Junior High. However, they'll be playing brand new characters. And to find out why and who they are, you're gonna have to wait until next week when we meet our first guest for season 2. Oh, I know, I hate to string you along, but trust me, it'll be so much cooler to talk about it with someone who was actually on the show. If you want to find out who our special surprise guest is, you can head on over to Patreon, where Ultimate Degrassi fans were able to leave questions and participate in guest episodes. And you can catch the bonus video on story structure and the special deep dive into a controversial episode over there as well. But on the podcast, each time we explore a new series, we'll talk to someone who worked on the show, either as an actor or behind the scenes, and hear their perspective and their role in the history of Degrassi. We'll talk about staple moments like when the Kids of Degrassi Street solidified these core values that would stay with Degrassi through the end of time. Casting unknown age-appropriate actors, taking the kids seriously and telling the stories from their perspective, having conflict that isn't always resolved at the end of an episode, using ABC story structure to give us character arcs, and taking the steps to tackle mature stories for a young audience in a responsible way. The Kids of Degrassi Street is often forgotten about, but without these little kids on a one-way street in the East End of Toronto, we wouldn't have the Degrassi we love today. Degrassi Street allowed Linda and Kit to figure out things along the way, keep what worked and lose what didn't. In this short amount of time, Linda went from making school projects with a class of 20-some kids to having a series that taught valuable life lessons all around the world. All of that history shouldn't be forgotten, and is another reason why I think you'll love Linda Schuyler's new book. Imagine hearing even more of these stories from someone who was not only there, but made it all happen. This podcast is my open love letter to Linda Schuyler, and anything I can do to throw support her way, I will do it every single time, because she gave us all of this, and she truly is the mother of all Degrassi. And as we end our first episode of Season 2, let's listen in as the kids of Degrassi Street graduate elementary school and await the big wide world of Degrassi Junior High. Thanks, guys.
Riley, congratulations. Nice job.